A very good afternoon to all of you. I am Nancy Garg, your host for today's webinar. I welcome you all to this webinar session on startup funding and compliance. I welcome our guest speaker, CS Shweta Sharma. Thank you so much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and joining us today for enlightening the young minds and budding lawyers connected with us here. So, first of all, I would like to introduce ma'am once to all the participants who have joined. Meet Shweta Sharma, a company secretary by profession and researcher by passion. She has completed her master's in business policy and corporate governance from IGNOU and BCom honors from Delhi University. Currently, she is working with an emerging startup, Probo, an information market for the future, as a whole-time company secretary. Once again, I welcome you, ma'am. I request all our participants to keep their video and mic off throughout the webinar. You can put up your queries and questions in the chat box, which would be answered at the end of the session by our guest speaker. Or you may raise your hand, then ma'am will directly answer your question thereof. Over to you, ma'am. Let's start this webinar now.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's my pleasure to be a part of Vidhi Parivartan. So let's get started with today's topic, the startup funding and the compliances. I'm just sharing my screen. Just let me know whether you are able to see or not.
Sure, ma'am.
Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am, the PPT is visible.
Yeah, okay. So let's get started. So our today's topic is startup funding and compliances. It is the hotshot topic for today's market. Everyone is thinking about the startup. Everyone want to know about the startup. Everyone want how the startup works and what compliances they do follow. So we will discuss all these things today. I have prepared 12 topics for you today and which we will discuss and we will get some sort of idea that कैसे startup work करता है and how do they raise fund from the investors and उसमें क्या difficulties they will face and major compliances they have to follow as per the Companies Act. Okay, so first of all we will discuss what is startup, then startup as per the DPIIT, then how to get recognition as startup for your entity, because to get the benefit from the government you shall have the certificate from the DPIIT which recognize your entity as a startup. What factors consist startup ecosystem? Why is funding required for the startup? Types of startups funding, stages of startups and source of funding, steps to startup fundraising. Basically, there are many steps which involve to raise the fund from the investors. ऐसा नहीं होता कि हम मार्केट में गए हमें मनी मिल गया. We have to follow some basic steps and we have to keep some point in our mind कि कैसे कैसे हम लोग जाएं step by step so that कि हमें वहां से जो फंड रेजिंग है उसके अंदर ज्यादा टाइम वेस्ट ना हो और हमको जल्दी से फंड मिल जाए बिकॉज उसके लिए फंड हमके किस लिए चाहिए देन वी विल आल्सो डिस्कस दैट पॉइंट आल्सो कि व्हाई डू वी रिक्वायर फंड इन द स्टार्टअप. What major challenges startup face while fundraising? What do investors look for in startups? ऐसा तो है नहीं कोई भी आके इन्वेस्ट कर देगा. हर कोई इन्वेस्ट करेगा जब उसे उसमें कुछ दिखेगा कि स्टार्टअप में हम इन्वेस्ट क्यों करें. If they want to invest in the startup, they will see some major points which every investor seek in the startup before investing. Why do investors invest in startups? And the major compliances under the Companies Act 2013 while fundraising. So all these 12 topics we will discuss today one by one. First of all, what is startup? Startup is a company. It could be a proprietorship in the sense of being merged with some partnership. So a startup could be a company, partnership or LLP as per the Indian government. But in general sense, in general parlance, we can say a startup is a company which is in the initial process or initial stages of the development of its products. Product could be anything. It could be a tech product or a manufacturing product or any product. So the company which is in the very initial stages वो अभी just emerge हुई है जैसे सीड है जैसे कि सीड हमने डाला है वो एक अभी just कंपनी emerge होना start हुई है अपने वो initial stages पे कंपनी ने अभी ज्यादा कुछ grow करा नहीं है. Startup generally involves very high cost बिकॉज उनको कॉस्ट ही कॉस्ट है, दे जस्ट बर्न द मनी ऑफ द इन्वेस्टर्स। बिकॉज स्टार्टिंग में हर किसी बहुत सारी चीजों के लिए स्टार्टअप को मनी लगाना पड़ता है, उनको अपना प्रॉपर ऑफिस भी चाहिए, दे जस्ट वांट कि आपके एडमिन एक्सपेंसेस हैं, सो मेनी थिंग्स विच रिक्वायर्स हाई कॉस्ट इन्वॉल्वमेंट, बट रेवेन्यूज आर लो। बिकॉज इन स्टार्टिंग आपका ऐसा तो होगा नहीं, मार्केट में जस्ट प्रोडक्ट आया है एंड वो बहुत जल्दी शूट अप हो गया एंड इन ग्रोथ स्टेज। सो इन स्टार्टिंग the startups has very high costs involved and very low revenues. Because of the low revenues, starting with the company will go into the losses for its initial 5 to 10 years. After being in losses, then the company start generating revenues and be in the profitable stage. Therefore, they require outside funding क्योंकि इतनी ज्यादा कॉस्ट इन्वॉल्व है। इतना फंड्स कोई भी जो फाउंडर है वो अपने बाय अपने खुद के पॉकेट से नहीं लगाता है। They want some outside funding. If they are taking the outside person in their company, they have to lose their control. For losing their control, they have to just give the equity portion, either equity portion or the convertible ventures to the investors who come into the startup. So next we will discuss the startup as per DPIIT. नॉर्मल स्टार्टअप तो जो हो गया कि कंपनी है हमारी इनिशियल स्टेजेस पे है, वो हमारा एक स्टार्टअप है। ये तो एक जनरल बैलेंस भी हो गया, आप ऑल ओवर द वर्ल्ड कहीं जाएंगे स्टार्टअप का मीनिंग आपको ये मिलेगा, बट एज पर द इंडियन गवर्नमेंट, Indian government has come up with the many schemes and the benefits for the startups in past 4 to 5 years, which just encourage the persons to come into the startups and do their own business rather than going for the jobs or seeking out some other thing or sort of employment. So the Indian government is encouraging the youth to come up and do startup. Therefore, the Indian government providing so many benefits or so many schemes for the startups. First of all, Indian government, along with the DPIIT, DPIIT is a Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. So this department handles the everything about the startups, the Startup India, and the Invest India is under the DPIIT. All this Invest India and the Startup is a government organization which look after the startup compliances and the startup schemes which is launched by the government of India. So as per the DPIIT, what is the definition of startup? First of all, any company, there are three criteria. All these three criteria shall be satisfied. After satisfaction of the all three criteria, all three conditions, then a startup will be considered, and then a company will or a private company, limited company, a partnership or LLP will be considered as startup. The first criteria is up to a period of 10 years from the date of incorporation or registration as a private company or a partnership firm or a LLP. Then in उनके initial starting 10 years में ही they will consider as a startup. This is a private limited company. Public limited company will not be treated as a startup as per the DPIIT. The another criteria is turnover shall not exceed 100 crore rupees in any year from the date of incorporation. अगर आपका 10 साल में फ्रॉम डेट ऑफ इनकॉर्पोरेशन टिल द 10th ईयर फ्रॉम द डेट ऑफ इनकॉर्पोरेशन, बीच में किसी भी ईयर में आपका 100 करोड़ से ज्यादा एक्सीड कर जाता है टर्नओवर, सो दैट ईयर आपका क्या होगा, आपका स्टार्टअप का जो भी आपको क्राइटेरिया मिला हुआ है, कोई सर्टिफिकेशन मिला हुआ है, रिकॉग्निशन में, दैट विल बी ब्रीच्ड एंड यू विल नॉट एबल टू गेट द बेनिफिट्स फ्रॉम द गवर्नमेंट as per the startup or the DPIIT guidelines. So for the startups, so they have to be under the 100 crore rupees and shall not exceed 100 crore rupees to get the benefits under the uh, schemes of the Indian government. Before getting the recognition from the DPIIT, the another criteria you have to satisfy is you have to justify with the government that entity you are working with, uh, working towards which innovation and which development of or improvement of products or processes or services. Actually, government will give you a only benefit if you are doing something extraordinary and which is satisfying the needs of the person in our country in some another way. Like we can take the example of Zomato. Zomato is an example, is a quick delivery of your food. I think within 30 or 40 minutes we get our food. उससे भी better अब example like Zepto, which is an emerging startup, and within 10 minutes you will get anything which you want, even a packet of a bread they will give you. They come out with some innovation or development of the products because they're just delivering you a product within 10 minutes. It's very big type of we can say revolutionary change in the market. ताकि आपको 10 मिनट के अंदर आप कुछ भी ऑर्डर करेंगे आपको मिल जाएगा. If you are living in Gurgaon or the Bangalore side area, you can just try this app. This is Zepto. You will get your item within 10 minutes. So all these criteria is being satisfied. Only then you will get the recognition from the DPIIT as a startup. But if your entity is being formed by splitting up or a reconstruction of your existing business, in that case, your entity will not be considered a startup because you are doing the same business as you are doing in the previous, before reconstruction of the company or in the previous, we can say, entity, which before the reconstruction. So it's existing business. This is not any new kind of business you are doing with. So this is just the startup as per the DPIIT. So we have to take the registration for the startup recognition. So what steps and what is the step we should follow to get the recognition as a startup? So first of all, to make or get the registration as a startup, you have to apply over the Startup India's website. You have to create an account of your company along with the attachments of certificate of incorporation, details of directors and the promoters. Then you have to highlight. You have to answer the questions to the Startup India. You have to attach a file and write a question, answer to the questions that what innovations you are doing with what product development or the improvement on the processes or services you will do with this startup, and how the employment scalability will be there or the wealth creation will be there in the market. How will you basically merge with or scale the employment in the market, and how will you employ the people, and how will you generate the employment? You have to answer all these questions. If the DPIIT professions who are engaged in the services there, they will check your answers, and if they get satisfied with your answer, either they will accept your application. If they are rejecting or giving for the resubmission, they will state the proper thing, proper remarks with their any decision, either the acceptance or the rejection. They will give you a reason why they're accepting, why they're rejecting before giving you the startup recognition. So if you are coming up with any idea, you can take your idea and just go and create your startup and get the recognition from the DPIIT and get avail the benefits which are provided by the Indian government. So our next topic is what factors consist startup ecosystem. If we all are check the news daily on a daily basis, so there are many things which are prevailing, and there are very many things which makes the startup ecosystem. India becomes the third largest startup ecosystem in the January 2022 after the US and China. India is the third largest ecosystem of startups. So what the startup ecosystem consists of? Why India's startup system is so strong? In the year 2016, there were only 900 something startups was there. But now in the financial year 21-22, there are around 14,000 startups emerged in this financial year only. And this data is from January 2022 only. After that, 2 महीने approx और हो जाएंगे financial year के February and March. It will be around 16,000 or under 16,000 startups will be there in the 2021 and 22. So it is very revolutionary change. इंडिया एक बहुत बड़ा हब बन रहा है for the startups, and the foreign investors want to invest in the startups emerging in India. So Indian ecosystems, basically startup ecosystem consists of many factors, which is displayed on your screen. The first is entrepreneurial culture. In the startups, you will not be guided by or not be मतलब basically आपके सर पर डंडा नहीं रहेगा कि like आपको ये करना है, आपको ये करना है. You will get your work. आपको काम दे दिया गया है. You are doing this work or that work. इस काम को आपको करना है, और आपका जो entrepreneurial culture ownership आपको मिलेगी. Case ownership आपको दे दिया कि you have to complete your task within the prescribed period of time and you have to complete on your own. You have the experienced mentors. आपके पास mentors होंगे, they will guide you. The regulatory environment you will create inside or outside. The collaborative culture कि आप collaboration कर रहे हो along with other outside another your company or other startups, or with the person in your organization outside the organization. Visible successes. अगर आपका startup है, the startup grows very fast. आज आपका startup अगर कुछ काम कर रहे हैं, आपको नहीं पता एक हफ्ते में वो कहाँ तक ग्रो कर जाएगा. सो ऑल दीज विजिबल सक्सेसेस दे हैव टू चेक. बट ये नहीं है कि स्टार्टअप ग्रो ही करेगा. देयर आर ऑल्सो द सर्कमस्टांसेस योर स्टार्टअप विल गो डाउन और आपका सेटअप फेल भी हो सकता है. So it's a visible successes. In fact, this is missed out. Visible successes and the failure also. The risk tolerance capacity of the startup and the availability of capital and technical skills with your employees you have employed in your startup. So our next topic is why is funding required for the startups? We have discussed what is startup and what the startup as per the DPIIT. There's a startup ecosystem we have discussed. Now we are discussing why is funding required for the startup? क्यों चाहिए पैसा स्टार्टअप को? क्या करेंगे वो पैसे का? वो अपने पर्पस के लिए यूज करेंगे फॉर द डेवलपमेंट ऑफ देयर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन दे विल यूज दैट मनी. So first is prototype creation. Prototype creation is a stage where you have an idea. आपके पास आइडिया तो है कि ये हमारा आइडिया है एंड हम इससे कुछ डिफरेंट करना चाहते हैं. तो उस आइडिया को प्रोडक्ट में कन्वर्ट करना इज अ प्रोटोटाइप क्रिएशन. एक आइडिया से आपने एक अपनी जो आपके मन में चल रहा है उससे आपने एक विजिबल एक चीज बनाई, एक प्रोडक्ट बनाया. इट कुड बी अ विजिबल प्रोडक्ट लाइक ऐप हो सकती है, आपका टेक स्टार्टअप है, तो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग स्टार्टअप है तो आपका कुछ प्रोडक्ट हो सकता है. वो आपने रेडी कर लिया. आफ्टर उसको रेडी करने के बाद यू हैव टू डेवलप दोज प्रोडक्ट्स. उसको डेवलप करने के लिए प्रोडक्ट डेवलपमेंट का जो जो स्टेजेस है यू हैव टू फॉलो दैट एंड यू विल रिक्वायर फंडिंग फॉर दैट पर्पस. Because without funding, without any resources, you can't do all these things because it requires funds for everything. So after product development, you have to hire the team for the process of product development because बिना आपके experienced person के, बिना experienced mentors के, you can't do the product development or any startup as a successful startup. So you have some experienced person in your team. The team hiring process is very crucial in the startup. They hire people, they offer them ESOPs. Very initial stage startups offer ESOPs to their employees because when they get ESOPs, they get retention in the company. So team hiring is a very crucial matter in the startup. So and for the team hiring, they require high fundings. Working capital, they require working capital money for because as a funding requirement because day-to-day activities है, ऑफिस स्पेस वगैरह है, इट विल इंक्लूड इन द ऑफिस स्पेस एंड एडमिन एक्सपेंसेस. जो ऑफिस स्पेस है उसके अंदर आपका कुछ भी अमाउंट आपको लगाना है लाइक एडमिन एक्सपेंसेस के पर्पज से और द वर्किंग कैपिटल पर्पसेस से. सपोज आपको रॉ मटेरियल परचेज करना है, आपको आप जो प्रोडक्ट मैन्युफैक्चर कर रहे हो उसके लिए, तो उस सब चीजों के लिए आपको मनी चाहिए. ये सब हो गया. बट legal and consulting services as the foremost services you require before starting your startup because startup में इतना investors का involvement होता है, you shall or you must have required the consultancy from your legal advisors. So you just to take the from their services you should have a funds because the charges of the lawyers in that case was very higher. So for that funding purposes, you just raise the funds from the angel investors or some other institutional investors from your for your startup. Then for the raw materials, equipments, licenses and certifications के लिए आपको funds की requirement होगी. Marketing and sale purposes, product तो बना लिया, but उसको market करना भी बहुत जरूरी है. जब तक आप उसको market नहीं करोगे, कैसे वो market में जाएगा and how people know about your product and how will they start using your product. So in that for that purpose also you will require the funds in your startup. So next point is types of startup funding. हम कैसे कौन कौन से इंस्ट्रूमेंट का हम यूज कर सकते हैं फॉर योर स्टार्टअप फंडिंग. So there are many instruments that you can use for your startup funding. The first is the equity based financing. We can bifurcate the types of funding into three categories, three broad categories. The one is equity based financing, second is debt based financing, and third is grant based financing. So above 4 points: equity, convertible notes, compulsory convertible preference shares, compulsory convertible debentures. These all four fall under the equity based financing. So basically क्या होता है? Equity में you have to give the control to the investor. आप कंट्रोल दे रहे हैं, आप इक्विटी इशू कर रहे हैं सामने वाले को, सम परसेंटेज ऑफ इक्विटी आर इशूइंग टू द इन्वेस्टर फॉर सम फंड्स. either it should be on either it be on premium on फेस वैल्यू पे कभी होता नहीं, इट ऑलवेज बी ऑन प्रीमियम. आपने प्रीमियम पे इशू कर आपको फंड्स लाने हैं, ठीक है. Well, the convertible notes are the notes which will convert into equity shares after some period of time as per decided between the promoter and the investor. Compulsory convertible preference shares. So compulsory convertible preference shares are those shares which will convert into equity shares after some period of time. कुछ साल बाद वो convert हो जाएंगे equity में. So it is also equity based financing. एंड इज द फोरमोस्ट और सबसे ज्यादा यूज करे जाने वाला जो इंस्ट्रूमेंट है वो सीसीपीएस ही है, दैट इज कंपल्सरी कन्वर्टिबल प्रेफरेंस शेयर्स. मेजरली जितने भी स्टार्टअप्स हैं जो फंड रेज करते हैं वो सीसीपीएस के रूट से ही करते हैं. सो दिस इज अ वेरी important aspect for the startup funding, the CCPS rule. And another is CCDS, that is compulsory convertible debentures. The debentures also being issued on the condition that you will just convert those debentures into equity after some period of time. For the issuance of these all type of instrument, the Companies Act just we have to follow all the points and all the conditions mentioned in the Companies Act, all the procedures mentioned in the Companies Act we have to follow. So जब आप वो सब पॉइंट्स फॉलो करेंगे उसके बाद ही यू कैन जस्ट टाइम यू कैन जस्ट रेज द फंड्स फ्रॉम द मार्केट और फ्रॉम द इन्वेस्टर्स. सो ये सारे हमारे इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स हैं जो हम यूज कर सकते हैं फॉर द स्टार्टअप फंडिंग. Sorry. The another next our topic is stages of startups and the sources of funding. ऐसा तो है नहीं आज हमारा स्टार्टअप बनाया अब से लेकर वो लास्ट तक ऐसे ही हो गया. It involves many stages. The first one is ideation or the pre-seed stage. Second is validation or the seed stage. Third is early traction or Series A stage. And fourth one is scaling or Series B, C, D, and E stage, or last is exit options. First of all, ideation or the pre-seed stage, we will discuss here. In that stage, what will we do? ये स्टेज वो स्टेज है आपने जिस आइडिया जनरेट करा है. आपके पास कुछ फुल प्रूफ प्लान नहीं है कि हाउ विल जस्ट टू सक्सीड विद दिस आइडिया और नॉट. आपने एक आइडिया आया उससे यू जस्ट वांट टू मेक अ प्रोडक्ट. आपने प्रोडक्ट बनाना चाह रहे हो, आपने कुछ बनाया, आपके पास कुछ आइडिया है, यू रिक्वायर सम फाइनेंसिंग फॉर दैट. स्टार्टिंग जब तक आपने कुछ रेडी नहीं करा यू विल नॉट गेट द फंड्स फ्रॉम आउटसाइड इन्वेस्टर्स. You just take the funds either from your friends or a family, or for self financing. The self financing is also known as bootstrapping. Like आप अपना खुद का पैसा डाल रहे हो, अपने फ्रेंड्स या फैमिली को इन्वॉल्व करो. लाइक मेरे पास ये आइडिया है, आई जस्ट वांट टू मेक दैट प्रोडक्ट, सो आई जस्ट नीड्स फंड. सो उस फंड के लिए आप क्या करोगे? खुद का पैसा लगाया या तो आपने अपने फ्रेंड्स या फैमिलीज में से किसी पर्सन को उसमें एंगेज करा अपने साथ. और थर्ड इज बिजनेस प्लान. आपने थोड़ा पैसा तो लगा दिया. नाउ इन दिस स्टेज यू हैव टू मेक अ बिजनेस प्लान और पिचिंग इवेंट्स. पिचिंग इवेंट्स आर दोज इवेंट्स वेयर यू जस्ट पिच टू द इन्वेस्टर्स कि लाइक मैंने ऐसा प्रोडक्ट बनाना चाह रहे हैं एंड we just want itna fund in terms in against of this person of equity or any instrument you are offering to the investors. If you are watching to the Shark Tank India, it is just that point only कि वहाँ पे आपके प्री सीड स्टेज वाले भी आते हैं स्टार्टअप्स. वहाँ पे आपके ट्रैक्शन स्टेज वाले भी आते हैं, आपके वहाँ पे वैलिडेशन स्टेज वाले स्टार्टअप्स भी आते हैं who pitch their ideas to the investors to get the fund from them. The second stage is validation or the seed stage. वैलिडेशन और सीड स्टेज क्या है? आपने जो प्रोडक्ट बनाने का सोचा था इन प्री सीड स्टेज, आपका प्रोडक्ट रेडी है, आपने प्रोडक्ट बना लिया, आपने कोई ऐप बना ली तो आपने ऐप लॉन्च कर दी. ऐप लॉन्च कर दी या आप उस ऐप पे वर्क कर रहे हैं अभी, तो आप क्या चाहते हैं? कुछ इंक्यूबेटर्स हो. इंक्यूबेटर्स आर दोज पर्सन हु विल हेल्प द एंटरप्रेन्योर्स टू रेज द फंड्स फ्रॉम द मार्केट. ईदर दे आल्सो इन्वेस्ट देयर ओन फंड्स इन द स्टार्टअप्स. द गवर्नमेंट लोन एंड स्कीम्स. सीड स्टेज में आप फंड्स कहाँ से रेज कर सकते हैं? इंक्यूबेटर से. गवर्नमेंट लोन या स्कीम से आप ले सकते हैं. गवर्नमेंट की बहुत सारी स्कीम्स है हु प्रोवाइड लोन्स और many facilities to the startups under various schemes. And the angel investors, the person or the individual who want to invest in the early stage startups, you can pitch your ideas to them because the angel investors are like आपके पेटीएम के जो फाउंडर्स हैं, आपके क्रेड के जो फाउंडर्स हैं और जितने भी हमारे भी इमर्जिंग स्टार्टअप्स हैं जो हमारे काफी ग्रो कर रहे हैं, उनके जो आपके फाउंडर्स हैं, दे जस्ट वांट टू इन्वेस्ट in the early stage startup. It's not only them. In fact, various consultants, lawyers, founders who want to be angel investors, थोड़ा थोड़ा मनी इन्वेस्ट करना चाहते हैं जो आपके अर्ली स्टेज स्टार्टअप्स है उनके अंदर। सो वो स्टार्टअप्स जो आपके आ रहे हैं उनमें पैसा कौन लगा रहा है? एंजल इन्वेस्टर्स लगा रहे हैं, इंक्यूबेटर्स लगा रहे हैं, गवर्नमेंट लोन स्कीम वाले लगा रहे हैं, जो भी स्कीम है वो लोग लगा रहे हैं। क्राउड फंडिंग, क्राउड फंडिंग एक ऐसा प्रोसेस होता है इन विच you just go to the market and go to the very mass people, not that much, but you are going to the open to the market, and by the crowdfunding you can do it by the some online websites. I will share that online website for the crowdfunding where the people get fund from the mass people for their startups. Then after the validation or seed stage, first stage is pre-seed, then the seed stage or the validation stage. The third stage is early traction or the series A stage. तो अर्ली ट्रैक्शन सीरीज ए स्टेज में क्या होता है? आपने जो ऐप बनाया उसके ऊपर आपने कुछ वर्क करा, रेडी है आपका ऐप, अब आपने यहाँ पे ऐप लॉन्च कर दिया। लॉन्च करने के बाद आपके कुछ डाउनलोड्स भी बढ़ गए उस ऐप के, तो मार्केट में कुछ अवेयरनेस बढ़ गई आपकी ऐप के लिए एंड आपका स्टार्टअप थोड़ा थोड़ा ग्रो कर रहा है। सो आपका जब स्टार्टअप इस स्टेज में आ जाएगा, सीरीज ए स्टेज में आ जाएगा और द अर्ली ट्रैक्शन में आ जाएगा, इन दैट केस यू कैन रेज द फंड फ्रॉम द मार्केट एज अ सीरीज ए फंड्स. In this point, in this stage, very so many people will get interest, will take interest in your startup, like venture capital funds. Venture capital funds will be very interested to take part in the startups who are, in that early traction stage, because they want to invest money and take the return from the such startups. So the early traction series A stage, where the venture capital funds, banks, NBFCs, and the venture debt funds will be interested to put their money into the startup and to in return of some amount or some return in some future stages, because कोई भी पैसा तब लगाएगा they are looking for some return. So venture capitalists, banks, and NBFCs and venture debt funds, these are three sources where the founders can get money, can get funded in the early traction or series A stage. After this early traction or series A stage, we will get the scaling stage or series B, C, D, and E, and so many series if we want to raise any other series of funds in that scaling. In the scaling phase, आपका business चल चुका है, आपने जो प्रोडक्ट बनाया मार्केट में बम्पर शम्पर होके बहुत ज्यादा क्या कर रहे हैं, मार्केट में स्केल कर रहे हैं, पीपल आर जस्ट टेकिंग एडवांटेज, आपको उनको इनको इंटरेस्ट आ रहा है कि वाओ व्हाट दैट प्रोडक्ट, आपका प्रोडक्ट बहुत मार्केट में शूट अप हो गया एंड यू आर जस्ट in the situation कि आपका बहुत मतलब हाइप बना हुआ, like Paytm before coming to the IPO or the Zomato. IPO से पहले वो लोग scaling stage में थे, because they are raising funds in various series like B, C, D, E, F, G, H. जब तक उन्होंने exit option नहीं आया तब तक वो क्या कर रहे थे, अपने सीरीज बेसिक बहुत सारी सीरीज के अंदर फंड रेज कर रहे थे. दिस इज अ स्केलिंग स्टेज जहाँ पे आपका बहुत ज्यादा बिजनेस हाइप पे जा चुका है, आपका स्टार्टअप चल चुका है, जिसमें आप कहाँ से फंड रेज कर सकते हैं. इन दैट stage you can raise fund from the venture capital funds, the private equity investment funds. In this stage many people will be interested to invest in the startup. बहुत लोग चाहेंगे कि हम इसमें स्टार्ट कर, अब इसमें इन्वेस्ट करें, तो वेंचर कैपिटल प्राइवेट इक्विटी इन्वेस्टमेंट फर्म्स हैं वो आप में इन्वेस्ट करेंगे. सो दिस इज द पॉइंट वेयर the founders get to raise the funds from the venture capitalist or the investment funds. The last stage, अब इन्वेस्टमेंट तो इतना आ गया, we have to provide the exit options to the investors, because जितने भी investors ने पैसा लगाया, they want some return from the startups, कि उन्होंने इन्वेस्ट करा है उसके अगेंस्ट उनको कुछ रिटर्न भी मिले. उनको रिटर्न देने के लिए हम क्या करेंगे, मर्जर करेंगे, एक्विजिशन करेंगे. मतलब एक स्टार्टअप है वो किसी और कंपनी के साथ मर्ज हो गया, तो जो उसकी वैल्यूएशन है उसकी बेसिस पे उसके इन्वेस्टर्स को मिला एंड दे गेट द रिटर्न. Either it get acquired by some other company, not get merged, they acquire from another company or some other sort of acquisition they have done. And the second is IPO. IPO is initial public offering. We all knows जब कोई company stock exchange पे list होती है, for the very first time it is known as the initial public offering. And after the initial public offering, people can trade in the secondary market the shares of that startup. सो उसकी वैल्यूएशन जो भी हमारी लगेगी, एंड जैसे भी हमारा कंपनी एज अ स्टार्टअप और आईपीओ पे लिस्ट होती है, देन दिस इज अ पॉइंट, दिस इज अ टाइम जब उनको एग्जिट ऑप्शन मिला इन्वेस्टर्स को। एंड इस स्टेज पे आते आते कंपनी बहुत ग्रो कर चुकी होती है, एक स्टार्टअप बिग कंपनी में कन्वर्ट हो चुका होता है। Now, the third is selling shares. Third option in the hands of the investor to sell their shares to other outsider person who want to purchase the venture capital firms or the investment firms who want to purchase the shares of the person who want to sell their shares. So in that case, the people who want to sell their shares, the venture capitalist or the investment firm purchase the shares from that person, and they just hold on, and they will also sell the selling of shares for as an exit option कि अपना शेयर बेच के आप exit ले लो कंपनी से करंट वैल्यूएशन पे. The fourth one is buybacks. The founders who have lost their control over the company in the various series they have raised the funds, वापस अपना कंट्रोल पाना चाहते हैं अपने जो कंपनी के ऊपर. So in that case, प्रमोटर्स बायबैक करते हैं, जितने भी शेयर्स उन्होंने इन्वेस्टर्स ने खरीदे हुए हैं उनसे बायबैक करते हैं करंट वैल्यूएशन. जो इन्वेस्टर्स हैं उनको एग्जिट मिल गया करंट वैल्यूएशन पे, दे हैव गेट द रिटर्न व्हिच दे वांट, और जो प्रमोटर्स है उनको कंट्रोल वापस मिल गया जो उनका डाइल्यूट हो गया था बिकॉज ऑफ फंड रेजिंग. So these are the exit option available to the investors while the fundraising process. After the exit options, we will discuss about the steps to startups fundraising. कौन कौन से steps involved हैं किसी भी startup को अगर fundraise करना है उसके अंदर. First of all, assessing need for funding. First of all, किसी भी चीज के कुछ भी पाना है हमें, कुछ भी चाहिए हमें, उसके लिए कोई नीड होनी चाहिए कि why do we need funds. आपके पता है अगर why you need fund to assess the various needs of the funding, किसके चीज के लिए चाहिए, कितना आपको फंड चाहिए, वो आपने असेस कर लिया. आफ्टर असेसिंग दैट पॉइंट, यू हैव टू असेस इन्वेस्टमेंट रेडीनेस. फंड तो आ गया, फंड की नीड पता लग गई, बट ये नहीं पैसा आया और हम सारा खर्च दिया. यू हैव टू जस्ट टेक दैट मनी एंड इन्वेस्ट समवेयर एल्स ऑल्सो बिकॉज वहां से आपको रिटर्न आए. तो आपको असेसिंग इन्वेस्टमेंट रेडीनेस ऑल्सो. प्रिपरेशन ऑफ द पिच डेक. You know where to pitch, to whom to pitch, from whom you want money, from whom investor or who investors you want to take the money and to take the funds. So you have to prepare it in the advance. Then the investor targeting. You have to target. You have prepared the pitch. The how will you pitch to the investors, target investors? Like we would want to give that percentage of equity against that percentage or that valuation of the company. But suppose 10% equity in return of 100 crore rupees, in valuation of 100 crore rupees. अगर आप 10% इक्विटी दे रहे हो 100 करोड़ की वैल्यूएशन पे, so this is your pitch. You have prepared your pitch. This is an example. Then you have to target the investor. Which investors you want? You want angel investors, you want venture capitalists, you want investment funds, you just take the money from the government grant or schemes. You have to target the investor. So first is you have to assess the need for funding, then you have to assess the investment readiness, then the third is preparation of the pitch deck, and then fourth is investor targeting, and the fifth due diligence by interested investors. आपने पिच रेडी करके इन्वेस्टर्स को टारगेट करा, बट जो इंटरेस्टेड इन्वेस्टर्स है दे विल आल्सो टेक द ड्यू डिलिजेंस ऑफ योर कंपनी. अगर वो आपको ड्यू डिलिजेंस करते हैं, दे विल चेक योर फ्यूचर प्रोस्पेक्ट्स, करंट सिनेरियो इन योर स्टार्टअप or the previous things which happened in the startup. All these things they will do. They will do the proper due diligence of the interested of the startup. So due diligence होगा, हर चीज देखी जाएगी, सेक्रेटरियल वर्क भी देखा जाएगा, आपका कंपनी के फ्यूचर प्रोजेक्शंस भी देखे जाएंगे, करंट प्रॉफिट्स हैं कंपनी के लिए, वेरी वेरी अर्ली स्टेज स्टार्टअप है तो प्रॉफिट्स तो कुछ होंगे नहीं, तो फ्यूचर के प्रोजेक्शंस देखे जाएंगे क्या क्या है. So all these things will be covered in the due diligence by interested investors. Then the last one is term sheet. This is the foremost point which is very important for the startup fundraising process, because in the term sheet basically क्या होता है, all the terms and conditions between the promoters and the investors will be decided here. कि आपके कितने, आपके बोर्ड पे कौन कौन रहेगा, वैल्यूएशन क्या रहेगी, आपका शेयर होल्डर्स एग्रीमेंट में क्या क्या टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस चलेंगे. ऑल दीज पॉइंट्स विल बी डिस्कस्ड अंडर द टर्म शीट. The next point is what major challenges startups face while fundraising. ऐसा तो ये नहीं कि startups बाहर गए market में and they get the funds. They face many challenges. The major three challenges are valuation, due diligence, and shareholders agreement. Valuation के ऊपर among the investors and the promoters बहुत बहस होती है because promoter हमेशा अपनी company की valuation high बताएगा and investor उसी valuation को कम बताएगा. So when the valuation is the biggest challenge faced by the startups while fundraising. Valuation should be done by the registered valuer. वो अपनी एक इंडिपेंडेंट रिपोर्ट देते हैं कि हमारी इतना अकॉर्डिंग टू देम आपको इतना आपका कंपनी का वैल्यूएशन है. दे यूज DCF methods, market comparable methods, many other methods available for the valuation. They take the appropriate method for the valuation of the company, and after the valuation they give that valuation report to the company and the investors, and on the basis of that valuation the shares being allotted to the investors. The second hurdle is due diligence. Due diligence में investor आपका सब कुछ देखेगा, current, past, future. आपके पास कोई भी documentation अगर complete नहीं है, something which is not maintained properly, और आपका कुछ भी कहीं पे भी कुछ कमी है, तो in that stage it is a hurdle कि आपका फंड रेजिंग प्रोसेस में दिक्कत आ सकती है. सो ड्यू डिलिजेंस प्रोसेस इज आल्सो वेरी क्रूशियल चैलेंजिंग पार्ट of in front of startups while raising funds. The third is shareholders agreement. The shareholders agreement is a very challenging part among the startups for fundraising process to decide the terms of the shareholders agreement, like how the promoters take exit, how the investors take exit, and the investors while investing in the startups they want a board seat in the company. If they are asking for the board seat, you have to negotiate with them, just take one or not to take the board seat. So all the terms and conditions decided between the promoters and the investors should mention the shareholders agreement. And these terms and conditions deciding is very challenging part because they have to negotiate very hard, very मतलब बहुत ज़्यादा उनको यहाँ पे negotiate करना पड़ता है to decide terms and conditions. The shareholders agreement is a very crucial, very difficult part to draft the shareholders agreement and to satisfy both the parties on the shareholders agreement. After the major challenges, we will come to the what do investors look for in startups. तो बेसिकली कोई इन्वेस्टर आपके स्टार्टअप में इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हैं तो वो स्टार्टअप में क्या क्या देखेंगे. Major things. First of all is the objective in the problem solving. Second is management team. Management team plays a very crucial role because आपकी मैनेजमेंट कैसी है, आपके मैनेजमेंट का बैकग्राउंड क्या है, द फाउंडर्स क्या 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 बैकग्राउंड है, टीम आपकी एक्सपर्टीज टीम है या नहीं है आपके पास, आपकी कंपनी में जो टीम है उसका ज़्यादा एम्प्लॉय टर्नओवर तो नहीं है. सो ऑल दीज थिंग्स दे विल चेक. मार्केट लैंडस्केप विल चेक कि आपका प्रोडक्ट मार्केट में कितना चल पाएगा. स्केलेबिलिटी दे विल चेक. सस्टेनेबिलिटी कि आप एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेशन कैसे कर रहे हैं एंड आप मार्केट में सस्टेन कैसे कर पा रहे हैं. हाउ योर रेवेन्यूज विल इंक्रीज डे बाय डे. कस्टमर एंड सप्लायर पे कौन कौन टारगेट मार्केट है, टारगेट कंज्यूमर्स आपके कौन कौन है, सप्लायर्स आपके कौन कौन है, आप किस रेट पे परचेज कर रहे हैं, किस रेट पे सेल कर रहे हैं. All these things, all these factors investors will look into for in startup before investing. The competitive analysis they will do. The your product and the product which is existing in the market as your competitor. They will assess both the products and after taking all the comparison between the competitive analysis, then they will invest. They will in the company if they think कि हाँ कर सकते हैं. So all these factors they will look into the startups, sales and marketing, financial assessments, exit avenues. कोई भी कहीं पे भी invest करेगा, कोई भी person invest करेगा, they first see the exit avenue. So invest तो कर दिया, वापस कैसे निकालना है, कैसे अपना पैसा वापस निकाला along with returns. So the investors will look all these factors in a startup before investing. So after these points, we will check why do investors invest in startups. क्यों करते हैं? We know हम पैसे क्यों लगाएंगे, कुछ रिटर्न कमाने के लिए. To earn return an amount invested. So आपके जो investors है वो invest इसलिए करते हैं कुछ return मिले. ऐसे कोई free में तो किसी को कुछ देगा नहीं. ये दो everyone wants some return. तो उस return को वो लेने के लिए they invest in the startups. सो एग्जिट ऑप्शंस आपको अवेलेबल होते हैं, इन्वेस्टर्स अवेलेबल होते हैं इन द स्टार्टअप्स कौन कौन से, मर्जर्स एंड एक्विजिशंस, IPO, selling shares, distressed sale, or the buybacks. So all these exit options available to the investors in the startup to take the exit from the startup in which they have invested to get the return on the amount they have invested. So because for the return purposes, the investor invest in the startups and to get the high return. And major high returns, they will get a merger acquisition or the IPOs. These are the two major exit options which are followed nowadays by the startups to give the exit options to their investors. After the why do investors invest in startups, we have another point, and the last point we will discuss here, the major compliances under the Companies Act 2013 while fundraising. So we have to follow so many compliances because आपको fund raise करना है, आप raise कैसे करेंगे? You have to follow some guidelines or some rules and regulation as per the act. So major guidelines and major जो भी sections हैं हमारे to raise the funds given under the Companies Act. So major sections for raising the funds is a private placement and the or preferential allotment. Private placement as per section number 42 of the Companies Act or preferential allotment as 62 1C of the Companies Act 2013. So private placement आप कब करेंगे, preferential allotment कब करेंगे? Preferential allotment private placement में एक slight सा difference है. That is private placement आपका securities का होता है and preferential allotment आपका होता है convertible the security which is convertible into equity और either equity मतलब equity के जो भी आपकी equity based financing है वो preferential allotment से करोगे. So as per the rules mentioned under the Companies Act 2013, the Share Capital Debenture Rules 2014, उसके according आपका जो preferential allotment है, it shall also follow the procedure mentioned in section number 42. सेक्शन 42 है हमारा प्रोस्पेक्टस एंड अलॉटमेंट चैप्टर का. इस सेक्शन 42 के अंदर भी आपको क्या करना पड़ेगा, जितने भी आपके 42 के अंदर आपके जितने भी पॉइंट्स है, जितने प्रोसीजर है, जितने भी आपके जितने भी रिक्वायरमेंट्स है, यू हैव टू फॉलो दैट आल्सो इफ यू आर डूइंग प्रेफरेंशियल अलॉटमेंट. प्रेफरेंशियल अलॉटमेंट आप यूज करेंगे इक्विटी फाइनेंसिंग में या फिर आप CCPS दे रहे हो, which is compulsorily convertible into equity shares after some period of time. You are offering CCDS to your investors. In that case, also you will go for the preferential allotment. Um, Meanwhile, you have to also follow the procedure mentioned section number 42. So आपको पर दो section applicable हो जाएंगे. 42 और 62 1C if you are going with the preferential allotment. Because अगर आप equity based financing करेंगे आपके ऊपर दोनों applicable होंगे. But you are just offering to your investors the non-convertible debentures. So in that case, the security. So you have to follow the private placement procedures. Section 42 you have to follow along with the rules applicable under this section you have to follow. So in the private placement, you will just give the securities what they are mentioned there. So अगर आपका equity based financing होगा, preferential and private placement दोनों को लगेंगे, otherwise आपका खाली private placement लगेगा. So इसमें major हमारे क्या-क्या compliances होते हैं. First of all, you have to call the board meeting. बोर्ड मीटिंग कॉल करने के बाद आपको कॉल करनी पड़ेगी EGM or the extraordinary general meeting. Board meeting में you will authorize for the issuance of any security you are offering to your investors. After taking the approval in the board meeting, you will recommend that to the shareholders in the extraordinary general meeting. After taking approval from the shareholders in the EGM, you will again just file you have to file the E for MGT 7 within 13 days from the date of approval of the shareholder in general meeting. अगर major आजकल जितने भी startups हैं, this is a very crucial point that you have to take in your mind. कि MGT 14 वो लोग नहीं file करते हैं. You have to file the MGT 14 for the special resolution you have passed in your shareholders meeting for the approval of issuance of any security to your investors. After filing of MGT 14, you circulate the private placement offer letter to the investors in the form PAS4. After circulating PAS4 among the investors, you will after the PS4 आपने कर दिया सर्कुलेट, उसके बाद आपके इन्वेस्टर सबके पास फंड भी आ गया. फंड आने के बाद आप क्या करेंगे, एप्लीकेशन मनी आपके पास आ गया. You have to allot, and for the application money you have to place that application money in the escrow account. अगर कंपनी के करंट अकाउंट में उस अमाउंट को रखते हैं तो अगर उस अकाउंट में रखा है आपने कंपनी के एप्लीकेशन मनी को करंट अकाउंट में, इट इज अ नॉन कंप्लाइंस। इसके लिए द कंपनी विल मे बी पेनलाइज इन सम फ्यूचर डेट। सो फॉर द एप्लीकेशन मनी यू हैव टू ओपन एस्क्रो अकाउंट, सम अदर अकाउंट एज अ शेयर कैपिटल अकाउंट। उसके अंदर आपका एप्लीकेशन मनी आएगा। उस एप्लीकेशन मनी को ओनली यूज कर सकते हैं फॉर द पर्पज ऑफ अलॉटमेंट और फॉर द रिफंड आपने अगर अलॉटमेंट नहीं किया। बट इन द प्राइवेट प्लेसमेंट यू हैव टू अलॉट बिकॉज यू हैव आइडेंटिफाइड द नेम ऑफ द पर्सन टू whom you are in allotting the shares. So after allotment किस में होगी? बोर्ड मीटिंग में बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स अलॉट करेंगे। अलॉट करने के बाद the company has to file the e-form PS3, the return of allotment, within 15 days from the date of allotment. And this is also a crucial point because कुछ startups MDT 14 भूल जाते हैं, कुछ PS3 भूल। These two very crucial form they have to file. अब ये सब हो गया, दे जस्ट थिंकिंग ठीक है हमने सब कुछ कर दिया और हमारे सारे कंप्लाइंस पूरे कर। नो, द मेजर थिंग इज लेफ्ट आउट बिकॉज द शेयर होल्डर्स एग्रीमेंट एंटर्ड बिटवीन द प्रमोटर्स company and the investors will modify the articles of association of the company according to the shareholders agreement. So जो आपका shareholders agreement enter हुआ है among the company investors and the promoters, तो उस shareholders agreement को you have to incorporate in your articles of association and follow the procedures as per the companies act for the alteration of your articles. So all these points shall be taken into consideration while compliances अंडर द कंपनीज एक्ट वाइल फंड रेजिंग। सो अगर आप सारे कंप्लाइंस पूरे करते हैं देन आपका स्टार्टअप विल बी सेफ और आपका नॉन कंप्लाइंसेस विल नॉट बी अ बर्डन। सो यू हैव टू डू ऑल द कंप्लाइंसेस ऑन द टाइम. So this is a major compliance which is applicable on the startups. This is all from my side. So thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening our participants on such a wonderful topic. It is such a crucial time when everyone should know what about startup funding and compliances they have to follow. So it's time for question answer round. In case any participant has any question, please feel free to get it clear from ma'am. You can either raise your hand or you can put it up in the chat box. In the meantime, I would like to put a question to the guest speaker of this event. So, ma'am, my query for the day is there any law in India which specifies that there has to be a mandatory registration for all the startups for a specific period of time?
Uh, yes, there is a law. This is not a law; it's a notification came out by the DPIIT in on 19th of February 2019. It's a notification that you have to register your startup. अगर आपने register करा है startup, you will get avail the benefits as per any scheme which is launched by the government of India or any department. So availing all those benefits, you have to register your startup and get the certificate of recognition from the Startup India. So this is the point.
Right, ma'am. So, is there any penalty that has been imposed upon the startups who do not register?
No, there is no penalty because the certification is required if you want to get the benefits. If you are just losing those benefits and you're not availing all those benefits, so it is up to you. There is no penalty for that.
Right, ma'am. So we have one question from Anshuman in the chat box. He's asking, is it necessary to put ROFO in a shareholders agreement?
May I know what he is want to say in the ROFO?
Anshuman, can you please clarify your point? We have another question from Saned. He's asking, do we have to register for startup under DPIIT?
Yes, you have to register your startup with the DPIIT by following the procedure. To get your startup get registered on the Startup India website, you have to just register your startup by filling this simple form and giving the simple answers. If they just are satisfied with your answer, they will give you certification. Otherwise, they will ask you to just modify your answers. Either they will reject or ask for the resubmission.
Right, ma'am. Thank you so much. So, by ROFO, Anshuman means right of first refusal.
It depends. If you are going for the safe agreement, in that this is not there in the shareholders agreement, but it is depend upon the investors and the promoters. According to the negotiation, those all points will be mentioned in the shareholders agreement.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much. The next question from Sanil is also, as you mentioned, it's not compulsory to register a startup, but do we have to register it as a company?
Yes, if you are working, it's up to you whether you want to work as a company, as an LLP, or a partnership firm, or you can just go ahead as a company. If you want to work as a company, you have to register as per the Companies Act.
Right, ma'am. In case any other participant has any query, please put it up in the chat box. So, ma'am, I think there are no such questions as of now. In case they would have any question, they'll reach out to you via LinkedIn.
Yes, sure, definitely.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was really a pleasure meeting you here. It was really a pleasure listening to you as well. It was really an informative and knowledgeable session with you today.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks,
so much.
thanks. I just want to say one thing that Vidhi Parivartan is doing very great efforts to educate the legal aspirants, and it's a very wonderful thing that you are doing. All the best.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It means a lot.
Yeah, okay, thank you.